So the next question is related to, again, the current situation, So it has come from Robin Decosta. His question is, news suggests that working professionals are worried about their job. In this situation, what would be your suggestion to the leaders when it comes to motivating their team? Considering almost all are connected from home, therefore the proximity influence is nil. Please, over to you, Ram.
Yeah, thank you, Kaushik. And again, I think there are two parts to this question, I would think. The first part of this question is about should we be concerned? And I think one of the things that I think we ought to do is to accept the situation, right? If you understand there's a model that explains how one reacts to a crisis. And I think it is both individual. We go through a range of emotions, right? There is a portion of our brain that deals with emotions, and another part of the brain that deals with the cognitive aspects, that analyzes things and then comes out with a calculated and a considered reaction. And sometimes in a crisis, what happens is this cognitive part of our brain gets suppressed by the emotional component of the brain. And I think so, therefore, it is incumbent on all of us as leaders to try and anticipate how people react to crisis. There is initial, it's a well-known framework, but initially there is shock, there is anger, there is denial, and then there is an element of bargaining that happens. And then you slowly move down that curve and you go through a phase of being depressed, which is, I think, what people are talking about, and then slowly get into acceptability. Yeah. And if we can help people navigate these various phases which they go through faster, reduce not just the time that it takes through each of these stages, but also how deep it impacts an individual. I think as leaders, that is our role. And yes, if we can get people from the initial shock to acceptance and finally to hope, you spoke about that in the earlier question about the hope of a new normal. If we can get that pace accelerated, I think it will serve us all well. For that, we need to do two things. First and foremost is, try and understand for ourselves how we feel about the change ourselves, right? So, there are various emotions. There are people in our families who could potentially be impacted. So there is a feeling of being, shall I say, scared about what happens to our loved ones. There could be feelings of isolation. It may not have happened to our immediate family, but because, as you say, we are cocooned, we are far off from our colleagues, etc., that could give a sense of not belonging to anything in particular, which is what I think in the historical, in the previous sense, our office was meant to serve, a sense of belonging and inclusiveness. You could touch and feel what you're part of. Now that's no longer there, so you feel a sense of isolatedness. And I think, I would think that the first phase in all of this is to accept the situation before we can think of how we get there. So then I think to the question that was being asked about how do we lead teams, that is the second facet for it. So the first facet, we try and accept it, and we do two things for ourselves. We focus on our strengths so that we know how we can contribute uniquely in this moment of crisis. Each one of us have got different skills to bear, and in a team setting, what is it to do with our strengths that we can bring to bear? That's one component to think about. Yep. The other component to think about, I would think would be what drives our passion. For every action, there is a why, right? If we can focus on, we go to work because we want to earn a livelihood because I want to have a safe future for my loved ones. That itself could be a strong sense of motivation as to why we are playing where we are playing. So individually, think about your strengths, think about your passion. What is it that creates meaning for the work that you do? I think that's on the personal side. Then there was this question that this gentleman asked, which also dealt with dealing with teams, because you are a leader, you want to try and, you know, put out the new normal and a sense of optimism for people. In that, I would think that you should talk about, again, two aspects. One aspect is a sense of being available. Yeah, it is all right. Not every call needs to be about how are you getting along with this particular job, particular task. It could be just an emotional check on how are you doing, what feels priority for you. You know, just help make it clear to the individual or colleague that you are available for them to open up to. And the second one that I would think is, you know, beyond being available, it is about over communicating. Right. Because typically what happens is, because your emotional part of the brain is playing a dominant role, playing a dominant role. Right. You know, you need to communicate simple things that register. You could do that with sharing examples, personal anecdotes, sharing things using figures, charts, etc. And even if it's about doing something or task, it should be about trying to communicate why that is important. So on the individual side, think about your strengths and passions. For the team, think about being available and think about over communicating.
Right. So, Ram, since the question is about motivation, of course, when I, interviewed you earlier for my book, you had given me two, examples from your life, which I, remember very distinctly, because those two etched in my mind since that day. And I want you to please share with, the viewers those two, real life experience that you had, and I'm sure viewers are going to love it. So please.
Thank you, Kaushik.
Yes, please.
I think this goes back to my early days. This is about 25, 26 years ago when I first was starting out in the industry. And one of the things that I got for myself is a small, wooden plaque that you can keep on your table. And in that plaque was, engraved these words, that it is better to suffer from pain in the neck by aiming too high, yes, than a hunchback by aiming too low. And I said to Ram Gopal, the future CEO. And I think that was on my working desk ever since I started. So, this was about, the incident where somehow, I felt that my calling was trying to, create some bit of impact in large companies. Yeah. And that credo about aiming too high and not, suffering the fate of a hunchback by aiming too low was something that I held myself personally accountable to.
So those who have missed it from the beginning, you can catch the full interview on my YouTube channel, The Process Pro Kaushik Majumder.